Hi, everybody. I'm Jennifer Valoppi, the founder of the Women of Tomorrow Mentor and Scholarship Program. Women of Tomorrow works to uplift the lives of at-risk young women in public high schools by teaching life skills and pathways out of poverty. I'm also an almost 30-year veteran of television news in New York, Los Angeles, and Miami. So the Jennifer Valoppi Podcast brings it all full circle for me. I want to make the life-changing content like what we teach at Women of Tomorrow available to women of all ages, everywhere, anytime. This show exists to share honest conversations and meaningful stories about turning obstacles into opportunities and helping you become the person you've always dreamed of becoming. It's about women helping women. Today, we're going to talk about justice, leadership, and what it really takes to make decisions that can impact people's lives and shape the future of our legal system. Our guest today is Judge Bronwyn Miller, who serves on the 3rd District Court of Appeal. That means that she reviews decisions made by lower courts to ensure they are legally sound, and her work plays an important role in influencing future court decisions that can impact both state and federal law. Before joining the court, Judge Miller served as a prosecutor in the Miami-Dade County State Attorney's Office, where she became training director and division chief in the felony unit. She has been appointed to judgeships by 3 Florida governors, and most recently in 2018, Governor Rick Scott appointed her to the 3rd District Court of Appeal. She's also an adjunct professor at the University of Miami School of Law. Judge Bronwyn Miller, welcome. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
So you've been a judge for how many years now?
21 years.
Okay, a long, long time, really, in judgeship. How long did you practice law for?
I only practiced law for 7.5 years before I was appointed to the bench.
Okay, and what inspired you to go for the judgeship?
So during the summer of my first year of law school, I went out to California and worked for the Los Angeles Commission on the Status of Women. Mm-hmm. And I also worked for a program called Court Watch. And during that time, the domestic violence courts were just emerging in California. They were a reaction to the O.J. Simpson trial, which was going on at that time. Mm-hmm. And I was in the courtroom every day, and my job was to observe the judges and determine whether or not they were enforcing the newly developed domestic violence laws. And some of them were doing a fabulous job. Some were stopping short of fully enforcing them. Mm-hmm. And we would go back and revise legislative proposals and make determinations as to an action plan. And that really inspired me. That was sort of the gateway that inspired me in wanting to become a judge.
So you've been appointed by 3 Florida governors, but you also have run election campaigns to the judgeship. Tell me how those two things differ.
Well, they're very different processes. Initially, I was appointed to serve on the bench by Governor Jeb Bush. And that process involved submitting an application to a judicial nominating commission. You and other applicants submit your applications, and then the judicial nominating commission makes a determination as to which candidates should be interviewed. From the list of candidates that's interviewed, they then select a list of anywhere between 3 and 6 candidates for consideration by the governor. The governor himself or his general counsel may interview you. You may have multiple interviews, and then a decision is made as to which candidate is the one the governor favors. As to the election process, it's a very different process. Right after I was appointed by Governor Bush, I had to run in the next general election, and I drew an opponent. So I had to run a contested election in Miami-Dade County, and Miami-Dade County is a very large place geographically, and it's also very diverse. So you're going out into the community, making inroads with the community and asking people to vote for you. They're very different processes.
So tell me about running an election campaign. That's got to be, I don't know, fun, not fun?
There were wonderful, rewarding aspects. I met so many lovely people along the way, so many people who care so deeply about the community. But physically and mentally, it can be very challenging because you feel that if you miss a community event or a forum, you may lose a vote and lose your election. So if you are very dedicated to preserving your seat, then you are never home. You're constantly on the campaign trail. That's why they call it the trail.
Right.
So you're down in the community and you're attending 1,000 functions. And at the same time, you're trying to obtain endorsements from newspapers and community action groups and unions and you name it. So it's a lot of work.
What's the craziest thing that ever happened to you on the campaign trail?
People always want to know what your views are on disputed legal issues. And when you're running for a judicial slot, it's not appropriate to give your view on an issue that might come before you because you would like the litigants to feel that they are going to have a judge who has an open mind, who's going to listen to both parties and hasn't arrived at a fixed opinion before the issue comes before them. Mm-hmm. So some people in the community were extraordinarily diligent in asking the candidates what their position was on an issue of importance to them. Sometimes that was a little bit daunting to deal with, and you had to have some diplomacy. But in terms of the campaign trail, I think most people who are involved in judicial campaigns care deeply about the judiciary. They care deeply about government, and they ask appropriate questions, and they really just want to interact with their judges.
So we were talking about a television commercial that you once did when you were running for office. Tell us how that went. What was that like?
So when I was running for election, during my first election, which was contested, as I told you, I met with a consultant who was concerned with scripting and filming a television commercial for my campaign. And he advised me on what I should wear and told me I should have my husband in the video. And at the time, I didn't yet have any children. So he told me, you should have a dog. And I said, but I only have cats. And he said, no, you should have a dog. People love dogs and they will vote for you just because you have a dog in your commercial. And I said, well, does the breed matter? And he said, yes, you should choose a golden retriever or a cocker spaniel because they don't offend anybody. Oh. Everybody likes a golden retriever or cocker spaniel and they view them as loyal, calm dogs. So lo and behold, I was able to procure a cocker spaniel, not just one, two. And we shot a lovely commercial in a big park with the two cocker spaniels. And I won my election with quite a healthy margin. And after the election, I went back to all my community groups to thank them for their support. And of course, many individuals came up to me to tell me how much they loved the dogs and they voted for me because of the dogs. So dogs, cats, all very helpful.
Are you a dog person now?
I love dogs.
Do you have any?
I do not have any dogs. I have a cat at home.
Okay. So do you think they would have told a man to do that?
I don't know. Well, I didn't have children, so I think they were looking for some type of accessory for me.
Yeah.
I just never, I didn't have time to have children until later after I became a judge because my professional life was so all-consuming. Mm-hmm. So probably they wanted to soften it a little because I was a woman.
So tell me about what you have to do from a media perspective when running a campaign.
Well, you have to take a multimedia approach. You need to develop palm cards. You need street signs. You need to have radio commercials. It's very helpful to have television commercials and also newspaper advertisements, particularly in local special interest newspapers that appeal to certain discrete communities.
What's a palm card? Just a handout?
A palm card is a highly embossed, beautiful color piece that showcases your biographical information and hopefully has a photo on it so that the public can connect you with your name when they see your name on the ballot.
Right. Well, Bronwyn is such a distinctive name that I would think that having the name Bronwyn is such a distinctive name that I would think that's memorable for people to remember when they go into the ballot box.
I was petrified because I have such an unusual name that my parents have saddled me with my entire life. I've had to spell it everywhere that I go. Obviously, combined with Miller, it's not quite as tough. But I was actually very concerned that the members of the public might not know I was a woman because there's a certain masculine edge to Bronwyn. So I put my middle name, Catherine, on the ballot to make sure that they knew that I was a woman. And I developed certain logos, that had to do with the last name Miller because it's easier to digest in certain regards. Miller Time, Miller Life, Miller, you have it.
Mm-hmm. So you felt then that being a woman maybe gave you an advantage?
And I did a lot of research and I found out, for example, that if your name is first on the ballot, you receive an edge. For the judiciary, women receive an edge. I think people feel that women are going to be kinder, more emotionally connected judges for better or for worse. Certainly that could be true and could not be true, depending on the circumstances. But being a woman gives you an edge when you run for judicial office. You tend to peel off extra voters just by virtue of your gender if you're running against a man. And I was running against a man.
Years ago when I was doing television in New York, they had a consultant come in to try and soften my appearance a little bit because I've always worn jackets in dark colors. And so they wanted me in sweaters for a while.
Cardigans.
Cardigan, yeah, exactly. So did anybody ever do anything to try and soften your edge as a woman being in such a powerful position?
Well, one of the things that you have to worry about if you're assertive and bold as a woman, of course, is that it can off-put certain people. They may feel that they want you to be more feminine. One of the things that I did was I made sure that I took my picture that was going to be on my palm card against a backdrop of an American flag, right? Because that's universally a symbol that people associate with political office. But I also went to glamour shots, of course, which was a big thing back in that era. And I made sure that my makeup was very femininely done. And I was smiling, of course, because people like to see women smiling. If they're not smiling, they grow very concerned. And I tried to make myself look a little more diminutive so that I would look smaller against a flag. I folded my arms in my photograph and tried to make my body appear a little more diminutive so that I would look a little bit more vulnerable. So that was the approach that I took.
Well, that's kind of what they were telling me to wear, like light blue, which is a color I never wear, or
Right.
anything to kind of soften the appearance because they were afraid that maybe people would be put off by a tough woman.
Exactly. Lots of pastels.
What was the biggest obstacle you ever faced as a woman in the business?
Well, when I first was appointed to the bench back in 2005, I was one of a handful of women on the bench, and I was extraordinarily young. I was 32 years old, and I certainly didn't have the experience commensurate with many of my male counterparts. So I felt a little bit of imposter syndrome, of course, and I made it my mission to work as hard as I could so I could bridge that experience gap. I took a lot of teaching positions and did a lot of work with judicial education and involved myself in the faculty of all of Florida's judicial colleges so that I could really try to inspire respect in my male colleagues. Of course, now the bench in Miami-Dade County has slightly more women than men, and it's changed a lot. When I arrived at the Third District Court of Appeal, I was the seventh woman, and then rapidly after I was appointed, 3 more women joined me on the court.
Wow.
So it's been really a lot of things have happened in my lifetime that have really transformed the landscape for women. And I see just a lot more equality in positions of power.
I think it's like 40% of lawyers in Florida and somewhat nationally are women, I believe was the statistic I saw, which is pretty astounding. I mean, I think they're talking about women achieving parity in the legal profession, in the next 10 years. So what do you think lawyers are doing right? Or what do you think the legal profession is doing right that maybe other professions could learn from?
Well, I think women make exceptional students. And so they're probably doing very well in their test scores and their undergraduate achievements. But I think the big struggle for law is not going to be in the numbers. I think in the coming years, the struggle that women have always had in the law, which is balancing other achievements, children, the obligations to maybe caring for elderly parents, all of the things that tend to more traditionally fall disproportionately on women, prevent women from gaining the sort of partnership numbers that you see across the country in positions of top leadership,
Right.
where the hours that are required are really exhaustive. For example, for litigators, you don't see nearly, just anecdotally, in Miami, you don't see nearly as many female litigators. And that's because,
Really?
to go to trial, you're in trial around the clock. You can't go pick your children up. And it's just sort of this grueling schedule that requires all senses to be dedicated to the mission of winning. So I think the real struggle is just going to be, how do we as a society support people from not just law, but from every profession? Because we're all expected to do so much now. We have to wear so many hats.
There are so many women lawyers, but they're not in the top positions. They're not the partners. They're not really in the leadership roles in the law firms. And I guess you answered that's why, is because they have so many other roles that are put upon them. How important then is it to have a supportive partner?
Well, I speak from personal experience. You must have a partner who supports all that you do, and that should be non-negotiable. If you have a partner who harbors jealousy, some type of envy because of your success, or who just doesn't want to see your success because they feel that you should be committed to other things, you should be very concerned because you may never reach your full potential. A partnership should involve two people striving to optimize the careers, the lives, the experiences of the other partner. And if you don't have that, you should think very carefully about continuing to be with the person that you're with.
And how about supportive kids?
Well, I have two teenagers, so my kids are not necessarily supportive at this point in their lives at all times. Sometimes they are.
Exactly.
No, I'm only kidding. No, I think it's wonderful. I think if you have supportive kids, it makes the climb that much easier. All of us serve as role models for our children, right? So I think your kids grow up with an understanding that if the work that you're doing is meaningful and important, and particularly if it impacts the community like the work that you do, it is something that they should be proud of. They should be proud to call you their parent because you are doing things that are profoundly shaping the community.
How do your kids reflect on having a mom as powerful as you?
I was a judge before I had any children. So they have never known any other life. It's just second nature. The other day, my daughter was writing an essay to go into the Cambridge Summer Study Abroad program. And I read her essay, looked at her essay, and surprisingly, she made reference to me. I didn't expect it at all. She said, I'm really interested in studying law because my mother's a judge, my father's an attorney, and I see the work that they do day in and day out and the way that it impacts the community. And I stopped for a minute and I thought, well, this is good. This is a good thing. She's drawing a life lesson, from this.
Yeah.
So.
That's very cool. Sometimes you have to kind of sit back and say, are you sure she wrote that? Really?
Yeah.
Has she really been thinking about that? Because
hopefully she didn't use AI.
Yeah, exactly. Huh? Well, speaking of AI, how has social media and technology in general, and now specifically AI, impacted the legal profession and in particular the judgeship?
So we're always striving to find ways to integrate AI effectively into the work that we do. And in the past year, there have been so many strides made by the companies that deliver us our legal research products. It's very interesting. I think really the sky's the limit. But knowing the guardrails that should be employed in using it is very important. So one of the things that's happened in the last year in the legal profession is there has been a rise in the use of AI by self-represented litigants and lawyers. And many times the AI produces results that contain phantom citations to legal authority.
Yep.
And this is very problematic. It's resulted in a number of cases across the country that have had bad results. So,
and it's not just that, but what about the idea of all these deep fakes? How do you know a deep fake if somebody brings in some sort of a crazy deep fake into a courtroom? Is there a way to know? Are there safeguards to tell if it's real or not?
Years ago, when digital photography first emerged, I co-wrote an article that appeared in the Florida Bar Journal on authentication of digital photography because people had a concern that the traditional authentication techniques for introducing a photograph or a document would fail under the new digital technology because it was capable of manipulation. I think the same concerns exist with artificial intelligence, but the legal system has to deal with each item as it's presented. And so, for example, in introducing evidence, you can use traditional techniques and traditional predicates for introducing those items, but anything is subject to manipulation, right? I mean, we see photographs manipulated. We don't know what to believe and what not to believe at times. So that has to be tethered to a witness's testimony, and then it all comes down to whether or not the witness is determined to be credible.
Mm-hmm. And how about social media, especially being the parent of two teenagers? What's the impact of social media on kids today, and how do we protect our kids legally?
There's been a great effort to come up with a common plan to restrict social media for children. And of course, there's several prominent lawsuits involving allegations that there has been emotional damage to teenagers who've become addicted to gaming and those types of things. Attempting to shield your children is paramount, but I think also one of the things that I've noticed just from a social perspective, having two teenagers, is that the children use social media and gaming as a way of communicating with one another, and they feel ostracized if they're not allowed to participate in that mission. So you have to strive to balance the social aspect of it so you don't have your child become a pariah, with the idea that they can't become obsessed and addicted to social media and technology to the extent where it's impacting their other activities or their school pursuits or their friendships.
We were talking a lot about how cyberbullying and releasing pictures that they shouldn't be releasing and all of that. How prevalent is that now? Has that kind of calmed down as an issue more or less now that AI is taking over? Or is it getting worse now that you can take anybody's face and put it on anybody's body?
We see a number of cases where there are issues relating to extortion and photographs or dissemination of photographs in school environment, and the sanctions and penalties that accompany that are very strong. So it's something that you want to caution your children about so you can have that discussion. And I know around the country, there's been horrific outcomes in cases where children didn't want to tell their parents that they were being blackmailed by individuals from abroad or who were working for criminal gangs. And the outcomes have just been nothing short of tragic. So I think it's something that you need to educate your children about so that if something happens, they feel that they have that lifeline to call you and discuss it with you instead of resorting to other means.
There's a case right now where an NFL player just got charged with killing his girlfriend, I believe it was. And the whole idea was he went and started discussing it with ChatGPT. I don't know if you saw that at all. So, and that was just, I think, like yesterday or today that came out. So this idea that people are using AI for, therapy, but also to find out how to get around a crime or how to cover up a crime. I mean, in a way it's certainly very frightening. In a way, it also makes it easier to catch someone, I assume, but it also allows for so many weird potential outcomes. I mean, can you just reflect a little on how you feel about AI in the criminal system today?
The future is uncertain in terms of what we're going to see in that arena. But certainly, digital footprints have become increasingly important to law enforcement. It's a very powerful tool for law enforcement. One of the things that I learned at a conference that I was at very recently is that some of the largest retailers have files on Americans, and it's based upon their shopping habits and other information that they've gathered along the way. That information is sometimes sought by foreign governments, and it's just being stockpiled in a way. Traditionally, in the past, law enforcement would have to seek a subpoena and then do the real legwork to get this type of information. But now it's being stored elsewhere, and so it can be garnered from third parties without implicating the constitutional layers of protection that are normally afforded to Americans. And I think we're at a crossroads right now. We're going to be seeing some jurisprudence in that area. Really wouldn't surprise me.
Let's talk about the difference between being an appellate judge and a lower court judge, since you have done both. An appellate judge is a very specific rule book, right?
Yes.
Explain what the difference is.
So an appellate court is an error-correcting court. It's not a court of first impression. It's an error-correcting court. So we look at lower court decisions and we decide, was there an error? And if there was an error, that doesn't end our analysis. The question is whether or not that error constitutes reversible error, which means that the case needs to be remanded back to the trial court to be retried. A trial court in many ways has way more power than an appellate court. We decide on my court cases in panels of 3. Circuit and county court judges decide cases in panels of 1. And they decide all of the facts in the first instance. Mm-hmm. So they get to decide whether or not a witness is credible or incredible. If they think the witness is credible, they can accept all their testimony or some of their testimony. If they believe a witness is incredible, they can reject all of the witness's testimony or reject some of the witness's testimony. And factually, cases are very important. Most of them rise and fall on the facts. So that's a very powerful role. If they get the law wrong, we look at the decision anew. We conduct a de novo review of the law, and then we have to decide, well, they got the law wrong. Does that mean that the case has to go back again? So they're very different roles.
What do you do if you believe someone is guilty of something, let's say in a criminal case, but you do see that there was error in that case? How do you handle that?
Well, that happens routinely. So you may have overwhelming evidence. In criminal cases, it doesn't matter if the evidence is overwhelming. That doesn't justify affirmance. If you have error, you have to determine whether the error was harmless. And that determining whether it's harmless does not rise and fall on whether the evidence is overwhelming. Mm-hmm. It rises and falls on the specific record in the case, maybe how many times the erroneous evidence was mentioned, maybe was it cured somewhere along the way? Did the judge give a cautionary statement to the jury about the evidence? So it's a very holistic review of the overall record that we conduct. But it's not whether a person is guilty or innocent at our level. We're not concerned with that. We're concerned with whether or not there was a mistake that deprived the defendant of a fair trial. And even if the defendant is guilty, they're entitled to a fair trial. Because if you think about it, maybe they just look guilty because they didn't get a fair trial.
Mm-hmm. You used to say there are 2 kinds of people that look guilty, those who are and those who are accused.
Right.
Right?
Exactly.
So look at it from the reverse then. What if you review something and in your opinion, that person was not guilty, but maybe the reversible error wasn't so strong? How do you come down on making a decision there?
We have to put any emotion or inclination that we have aside and just rely strictly on the law. And sometimes it's hard to gather from a cold record whether our instincts are correct or not. That's why we can't allow them to be overriding. Many times I've heard a judge say, well, I think, this case is going to be affirmed, but it seems to me this person, the evidence is very thin, so, but it just depends on our precedent. The cases we've decided before, how the Supreme Court has decided cases, and we adhere to that. We can't go with our instincts, and our instincts might be wrong.
And you decide in panels of 3?
We do.
Uh-huh. Okay, so what's the craziest thing you've ever seen in a court case?
Well, when I was a young prosecutor, I was in a courtroom, and a judge was on the bench, and we were having little plea conferences off to the side, extending pleas. Very busy courtroom, and a defense attorney was stabbed with a pen by his client. It was a very frightening scenario. He was in a jury room with the door open so he could talk to him privately, and his client stabbed him. And it was, of course, the police were called and fire rescue was called, and he survived, but it was deeply disturbing.
Where was he stabbed?
He was stabbed in the neck.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Wow. That must have been really frightening. So what ended up happening to the defendant?
I'm quite sure he was charged with aggravated battery or attempted murder, and subsequently went to trial on his next case
with another lawyer.
Exactly.
Wow, that's amazing. What's like something that irks you when a lawyer comes in and does it in your courtroom?
One of the things that I think would constitute a pet peeve, so to speak, is when we ask lawyers questions, because we conduct oral argument. The lawyers appear in front of us, and we're trying to really distill the case down to what the essential issues are. So it's really important for the lawyers to ask the question directly, answer the question directly that we're asking. Sometimes they don't like the question, so they want to dodge around the question or reframe the question. And it's always better to just answer the question and then explain why this case is different, or explain why that question doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
But it's good to answer the question up front, because otherwise it's hard for the listener to follow the argument, because the listener is thinking, that lawyer didn't answer my question. Maybe he didn't have an answer. Maybe she didn't like my question. So it's just better to answer it and then move on.
And what about like a defendant? What's the worst thing a defendant can do, short of stabbing his lawyer? What is the worst thing a defendant can do in a courtroom?
I'm very fortunate. I usually had very well-behaved defendants. I think if you're a judge who affords respect to the litigants in the courtroom and they feel heard, they're much less likely to feel frustrated and lash out. So I think perception is important. But I will say that it doesn't get you any points to sort of behave badly in court, to yell at one another, to feign heart attacks, to do things that are dramatic, to be disrespectful to the court. It really doesn't earn you any points. So it's not a good strategy. It's a better strategy to be respectful and have a meaningful dialogue and argue why you win under the law.
Well, you see sometimes defendants, and I can understand this, hearing someone testifying, just shaking their head no, or, that can't be, or frowning or grimacing or making, various facial, expressions. Does that impact you? Do you think that impacts judges when they see that?
I think it could very well impact jurors, and it's a human reaction, right? If you disagree strenuously with what somebody's saying. We've seen it in various professional settings, even at the State of the Union and so forth. So it's a human reaction. We're all human. We all make mistakes. We all have emotion. We can't always suppress our emotion. That's just the way it is. But generally speaking, it could really alienate the fact finder, because if they agree with the testimony, or they think the witness is credible, or they take a certain liking to the witness, it may do more damage than it's worth. So it's really better to be a little more poker-faced in court.
I mean, I always think sometimes when you see people react, it's like, well, if you know that's not true, what somebody said, of course you're going to react. But how does the judge and how does the jury reflect on seeing that reaction?
Right.
There's kind of like, damned if you do, damned if you don't. Sort of.
Exactly.
Yeah. So how has it been being a woman in such a high-level position all these years?
Well, I think when I was young, I sort of lacked some of the gravitas that I have now. I've had a wonderful career spanning many years. And I think if you work really hard and you make your mark, then your interactions with both men and women will be very positive. Like I told you at the beginning, the legal landscape has changed quite a bit since I was first appointed. And there's certainly much more diversity on the bench, so to speak, now than there was early on. I have wonderful colleagues on my court. My male colleagues are supportive. They listen to what I have to say, and they treat me as an equal for sure. And I feel very, very fortunate, because I know that's not the case for everybody. I talk to women all over the community. I know that's not always the case. But I think that when we're engaging in the type of work that we engage in, that's so philosophical, that's esoteric on so many levels, and it requires collegiality, because we can only decide an opinion in a panel of three. We can't decide an opinion individually. I have enjoyed much more support at this level because of the nature of the interaction that we have to have. We get together, we talk about cases, we talk about legal issues. We're constantly discussing, current cases and hot topics in the law, and it creates a bond, which is very supportive.
So I don't know if you feel comfortable talking about this or not, but I want to talk about the idea of sexual harassment in the workplace. One of the things that has always struck me, because you're talking about how you are treated with a great deal of respect, is that women need to be taught to stand up for each other, to stand up for themselves. What we really should be doing is encouraging young women never to allow themselves to be put in those positions and to stand up for themselves when they happen. I'm just kind of, thinking out loud, but I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
When I was in college, I worked in retail to pay for my college. I worked pretty much full-time in retail while I was attending college. And I had one of those bosses who every morning would give me a big hug, and it wasn't platonic. And I was a very young woman who needed my job, and I felt extraordinarily uncomfortable. And it was unpleasant. I dreaded going to work and being alone in the morning because I knew what the routine was going to be. Fortunately, he never took it further. So I understand what people have gone through and what people face in some workplaces. At the same time, and I also recognize that we're very fortunate. We live in Miami-Dade County, and there are many women in positions of power in Miami-Dade County. It's not necessarily like that in other places. And I'm not sure some people view women as equals, and it can be generational too. So I understand that the struggle is real. I'm not sure what the right answer is, but I think anything that involves potentially empowering women to stand up for something that they think is wrong is a positive and necessary component of what we're doing moving forward.
Are you surprised sometimes when you see women not standing up for other women?
Well, I do see that. And I think one of the things that's happened, because we just haven't had equal access to power over the years. And so one of the things that's happened is women get to the top and they don't necessarily want other people to come join them on the top. Or they're struggling to get to the top and they see other women as their competition, not men. They think it's them against another woman because they see them as viable alternatives. And that's very disheartening to me. I think one of the things that has held us back from, having a female president or, reaching some other pinnacle, female governor, is that we don't support each other. And we see each other as threats to our success rather than as valued colleagues and comrades in the struggle for survival that is the human condition.
No, I've always said that I don't think women will ever achieve true equality until women start supporting each other. But even you look at like some of the things that have become very political now, like in Iran, for example, where women have been beaten, killed, mutilated because they didn't want to cover up to the point where, others required them to be. But you don't see women standing up for those women.
No, it's the opposite. You see women beating those women or reporting those women to the authorities.
But you don't see women even in this country.
Right.
Because it's become a political issue rather than an issue of women standing up for each other. And it's at some point, I'm a little surprised at us as women not taking up some of these basic women human rights issues that, you've got a lot of women's organizations, but yet they're saying nothing.
That's a very powerful observation. And there are basic rights and basic values that all of us should share that should not be politicized. They shouldn't be politicized. Whether somebody chooses to cover their head with a scarf is an entirely autonomous decision that should be supported regardless of what the person's choice is. You make a very, very powerful statement.
it surprises me that women in this country aren't being more supportive of the women in Iran who have been, I saw the women who were mutilated their eyes because they didn't cover up properly. So, it's kind of a strange thing when we have women's organizations that don't take up basic human rights for women.
Well, they may be catering to a certain constituency and sort of creating a political message that prevents them from taking on a cause that could be universal if they were willing to take that risk. I mean, we're living in such politically charged times that almost any cause can be molded into a political framework. And all that does is drive a division between people. Mm-hmm. It doesn't bring people together, and it's very concerning to me. It's something that I've really seen as way more pronounced post-COVID. There are certain issues that should transcend political differences, and people need to give that great thought.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think everything is so political these days? Why is everything so divisive? It didn't used to be this way.
I think people were very isolated during COVID. They were in fear. They were in fear of their survival. Mm-hmm. They saw other people as potentially threatening because they could be carrying a life-ending illness and they could infect them. So they stopped seeing people as allies. They saw people as threats. And they also began policing people. If people weren't wearing masks, they would turn them in. And we started living in this very odd, futuristic society. Now, politics has become extraordinarily tribal, and people have adopted identities based upon their politics. And it's really not that much different than the dynamics of street gangs, where people affiliate with a certain gang and they sort of replace their family unit and provide them with the support that they would normally derive from a family unit. And I think we're seeing that in politics. I think that the political family is serving as a proxy for the nuclear family unit and providing support to these individuals. And that's their whole identity. Anecdotally, I'm attending a family reunion for a branch of my husband's family this weekend, and everybody prepared a questionnaire in advance. And when I looked at hobbies, several people had written down their political views and activities as their hobbies. And I said, this is very interesting. This is so important. This is the first thing that they're thinking of. It's not running or playing the piano or socializing. It's politics. So that's how politically engaged people have become. And then, of course, people only want to be around like-minded people. So they're in an echo chamber, and it just sort of exacerbates extremism. So those are my views.
That's very interesting. I hadn't thought about it so much from that framework of COVID, where people started policing each other, which is very interesting because I know there's been a lot of research in the psychological literature on what happens when you put one group of people into a policeman sort of a role. The results can be very frightening, actually. They're very scary pieces of research that have been around for 30, 40, 50 years. So that's very interesting. I've never thought of it that way. I also think, I remember when I was a young reporter, the Democrats and the Republicans would fight it out in Congress, and then they'd all go have a drink together, at the local bar in D.C., right? I mean, it was business is business, but you're still a good person. You're still a decent human being. Now it's like nobody thinks that anyone's a decent human being anymore. Everyone is like the enemy and is evil. It's like the recasting of a difference of opinion with being evil instead. And that's very scary. I don't know really how that happened. I think the COVID thought is a really interesting one that I want to think more about, but I'm not so sure how we get out of something like this.
I agree. I mean, it's unheard of to have bipartisan efforts in Congress now. And historically, campaign finance reform, many, many different efforts were bipartisan in nature, and you just don't hear about it anymore. instead people vilify each other, as you indicated. So there's a certain lack of gentility that has come into play too.
Do you think it's because social media is only pushing people what they already want to hear, so they never get to hear the other side of the story?
Well, I think the algorithms that we're subjected to as a result of what we're interested in have narrowed the news source that people receive. And so people don't even realize what news their fellow Americans are viewing. So you could have one person who only watches CNN, one person who only watches Fox News, and they're receiving a completely different dialogue of world events, and they're not likely to read the other or view the other in order to arrive at their own conclusions.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the news that we receive is simply people feeding us information, but through a particular viewpoint, as opposed to giving us factually sort of agnostic information. And that takes out the thinking component that normally you would have to process the information and then formulate your own views. And it's a shortcut. You don't have to do that. So it makes it easier. It's an easy delivery, and you're simply, recycling views that have been provided to you. So I think it's also dangerous to critical thinking, what's happening, because we can't lose our ability to critical think. You talked about AI earlier. If AI starts replacing our thinking, because we don't have to think, we don't have to retain information, and then we have these algorithms that decide what information we want to receive and what viewpoint we want to receive it through, we're going to lose the ability to critically think. And that's a skill that has enabled us not only to survive as human beings, but allowed us for each generation to develop higher IQs than the last generation. I was just reading last week that this is the first time that IQs have not risen in this generation. And they believe it's because of the impact of social media and the non-need to store information.
And critically think.
Right.
Huh.
Right.
So as a judge, you have to be impartial. You're trained to be impartial. What tips can you give to people to starting to look at the other side of things, regardless of what side of the aisle you fall on?
Well, I don't ever read one news source. I do like to stay on top of the news. I like to know what's going on. And I read a lot of European publications too. I read all different news sources, and then I try to arrive at my own conclusions. But we're trained to look at side A and side B, and then usually the result is somewhere in the middle, usually. Mm-hmm. So we're used to weighing information. So I think I can do that, and I can do that without being offended by a view that's being thrust upon me. Back to what I was saying earlier, I think people feel so strongly about their political beliefs that if they're being challenged with additional information, it becomes very personal. Mm-hmm. They feel that it's a personal affront, and maybe their intelligence is being questioned, their views are being questioned, and they don't like it. They can meet that questioning with hostility. And I think it's so important that we keep an open mind and that we somehow re-engage in civil dialogue in politics in this country.
Sandra Day O'Connor was appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court in the early 1980s. I think it was 1981.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did she have an impact on you?
Obviously, I, like so many others, I thought it was magnificent to see a woman on the court. She had a great legacy. She was, of course, in the legislative branch before that. So she had a very long and storied career, and she had a great supportive partner who was with her till the end when she started, suffering from Alzheimer's. She had a great impact on my life. I looked up to her. I always looked up to women in power. I just saw her as a great role model, very dignified, and she was also a swing vote on so many important Supreme Court cases that her diplomacy shone through. Some of her cases have not withstood the test of time, but you could see that she was able to really cultivate a majority and sort of reach compromise and resolution so that the court wouldn't be divided on some of the most divisive cases.
Did you ever make a legal decision that you regretted?
I mean, there are many. The issue becomes sometimes the law requires you to reach a particular result, and it's not a good result. It's not an equitable result. It's not a result that anybody who was a good and moral person would think is the correct result. But sometimes the law demands unjust results, and we are merely charged with applying the law and enforcing the law.
If you were a young lawyer starting out today, what kind of advice would you give to yourself?
I think there are always going to be people who are smarter than you in the room. You have to accept that. There's always going to be somebody smarter. And then even people that you think might not be smarter may be smarter than you at certain things. They have skill sets that should be valued. So knowing that, you should be the hardest working person in the room because you can outwork anybody. You can't necessarily change your IQ or your skill set that you're born with, but you can outwork anybody. So my advice is work as hard as you can at everything you do and really try to make an impact at everything you do, whether it's being a mother, whether it's being a wife, whether it's a professional career, whether it's making your bed in the morning, whatever it might be, work really hard at it so that you can show finesse and you're always striving for improvement.
Florida was one of the first states in the country to have cameras in the courtroom, to allow cameras in the courtroom. Has that been a good thing?
I think there are mixed views on that. The federal courts don't allow cameras in the courtroom, as you know. They permit sketch artists with varying results. Some are very, very, very good, and others are interesting. All of my oral arguments are videotaped, and it gives a certain level of transparency to the public, but also it allows people to be able to see what it's like in the courtroom who might not necessarily be able to be there. They might want to see what's happening in court, but they can't travel there. They can turn on YouTube and watch the proceedings, and they can see what's happening. They can review the arguments. And it also allows the art of advocacy to be passed along from generation to generation because people can watch other lawyers in court and aspire to be like them and adopt their techniques and really learn from the presentation that they've reviewed. And advocacy is an art. It's not a science, it's an art. So to be able to see the greats and learn from that is very important. And also having cameras in the courtroom, I think, probably makes the judges a little bit more conscious of the perception of whether the trial is fair, whether the proceedings are fair. And it's just a reminder that, you know, there's a duty to the public to ensure that due process is observed. And sometimes due process can look different in different situations, but due process also concerns perception.
There's so much talk about so many jobs in the legal profession being replaced by AI. Where do you see that going for young lawyers?
I think a lot of secretarial and paralegal type skills might be supplemented by AI. So, for example, if somebody wants to draft an affidavit opposing summary judgment, probably we're going to be able to get to the point where AI can summarize a deposition and provide an affidavit in a very short period of time that will reduce manpower. But at the same time, I think that everything will still need to be overseen by lawyers because ultimately, at the end of the day, a lawyer has to place their bar number and their signature on whatever submission they're putting into court. So just like the hallucinations or phantom sights that we discussed earlier, they cannot do that in good faith unless they've reviewed everything. And, you know, AI is not going to get sued for malpractice. The lawyer will. So there have to be checks and balances. So will it make our jobs easier? I'm sure. It's going to make everybody's job easier in these types of arenas. But will it take away our jobs completely? No. It will not replace the jobs of human beings. Absolutely not.
So where do you see the biggest opportunity for lawyers in the next 5 years that maybe nobody's talking about right now?
Well, everybody's talking about AI. So being able to effectively use AI so that you
Yeah.
can increase the volume and efficiency of your practice.
Yeah.
Whether it's algorithms for identifying potential clients, whether it's document review and organization that would normally be extremely time consuming.
Mhm.
All of those things are opportunities that are in their infancy right now. So international transactional law is going to become very important, particularly here in Miami, but elsewhere in the U.S., of course, too.
What's one thing you look for in your most trusted people?
The qualities that I look for are loyalty, discretion, hard work, and people that are fun to work with, people you want to be around. Because if you don't want to be around your colleagues, they can be loyal, they can be hardworking, but you're not going to want to spend time with them one-on-one.
What is one of the best pieces of advice that anyone ever gave you?
Early in my career, I was told you should get a mentor and you should it should be somebody that you strive to be like, and you should consult with them on all of your important life decisions. So when I was in law school, I began working as a certified legal intern at the state attorney's office, and I was able to try cases because I had a provisional status with the Florida bar that allowed you to do that. And I remember walking into work on the first day, and I saw a woman who is my boss, and I was like, wow, she had this great jacket on. She looked amazing, big smile. And I'm like, this is my boss. She was beautiful. Everything. I was like, oh, so inspirational. So we worked together. She took me through my first trial. We had just a wonderful time together. I was sort of like a clerk to her, but I was an intern. And she mentored me when I was considering becoming a judge, gave me very sage advice, was there during many, many life-changing decisions that happened in my life, both personally and professionally. And she's a judge. She decided she wanted to run for judge. My sister helped her on her campaign. And she became a judge, and she's on the circuit bench. And I've never forgotten what a great mentor she was.
Oh, that's a fabulous story.
Yeah.
Yeah. So did you have other female mentors?
I've had mentors all along the way. I mean, even beginning in high school, I worked as an au pair over the summer, and the mother was just somebody who I looked up to at all times.
Wow.
Mentors come into your life when you're not expecting them sometimes.
Yeah.
All teachers are mentors, of course.
Yep.
They're wonderful. They stay with you forever, especially when you start getting old like me. You start thinking about your teachers and how great they were. And every step along the way, I've just had wonderful people in my life. And they don't necessarily need to be people with more experience than you, because sometimes younger people can mentor you too, especially as we move forward with AI and social media and things of that nature. My clerks are always there giving me advice, telling me what direction we're going in, because they're on the cutting edge of everything.
Yeah.
So I think of it more as a human pod than necessarily a mentor-mentee relationship.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Maybe next time I need help with something, instead of asking my kids for help, I'll tell them I need a mentor.
Reverse mentoring, exactly.
So if a young woman today wants to be a judge, what would be the first thing you would tell her to do?
Well, the first thing is she's got to get ready to go to law school.
Right.
So she needs to take an LSAT. She needs to prepare her applications, and then she's going to go to a wonderful law school. And the law school that she chooses should probably be in the community where she wants to practice if she really wants to be a judge, because she's cultivating voters or individuals who will assist her with the appointment process for later on. So if she has the ability to go to a law school that's in the community where she wishes to be a judge, she should seize that opportunity. Then she should start thinking about relationships with her classmates, because 10, 20 years from the time she graduates from law school, those classmates will be firm partners. They will be working in the governor's office. They will be in the legislature. They will be in the executive branch. They will be on the Judicial Nominating Commission, and they will be perhaps opposing counsel on a case. They will perhaps already be judges, and they will be the people that she will be seeking support from to obtain her dream.
Wow. Yeah, that's great advice. Personally, what makes you feel powerful?
Well, I'm a runner, as you know, and I'm a distance runner. I I hadn't run a marathon in a long time, but I ran the Miami Marathon this year because I had been concentrating on running ultra marathons, which are distances that are greater than 26.2 miles. And I derive a sense of completion from running.
Mm-hmm.
It's very therapeutic. It allows me to solve problems and cases, to solve problems in my life. And it's the great synthesis of physical and mental enlightenment. So that's something that means a lot to me.
Nice. Judge Bronwyn Miller, thank you so much for being here. It's so great to talk to you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Before you move on with your day, take a moment and think about one idea from today's conversation that resonated with you the most. Write it down or share it with us on social media at Jennifer Valoppi or post it in the comments. We'll read them. We may feature your responses to help inspire other women who may need to hear it. Every episode ends with a micro action. That's something simple you can do to improve your life and move yourself forward. Today's micro action is to take one brave step. Ask yourself, what is one small step that you've been putting off? Do one thing today that moves you closer to the life you want. And remember, every step you take takes you one step closer to your future. And if today's conversation meant something to you, then share this episode with one woman in your life who might benefit from it. When women support each other, incredible things happen. This podcast proudly supports the Women of Tomorrow Mentor and Scholarship Program, which serves thousands of young women through mentorship, education, and access to opportunity. If you would like to learn more or support our mission, please visit Women of Tomorrow at womenoftomorrow.org. Your support helps us change the world one young woman at a time. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, leave a review, follow us on social media at Jennifer Valoppi so more women can find these conversations. And remember, women helping women can change the world. Thanks for listening.